Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. I'm Michael Branson Smith, and I'm here with Jim Groom.
Hello.
And Jim, you know, when you're building your business, you know, it was just a bunch of guys, right? And, you know, then you know some peoples, and they know some people, and then you just know how to get the job done, right? That was like what it was like putting it all together. And that's the kind of advice I think we're going to get out of Christopher Walken for At Close Range, the 1986 American Gothic family crime story directed by James Foley, screenplay by Nicholas Kazan. And the shepherd of the project was really this man, Elliot Lewitt, who had pitched the story for a number of years after stumbling upon the attempted murders of Bruce Jr. and his girlfriend that were spawned, or the son, Bruce Jr. was a son of Bruce Johnson, the notorious leader of the Brotherly crime game in southeast Pennsylvania that terrorized that area, stealing tractors, dealing drugs, cigarettes, and many, many other things, committing a number of murders for the better part of the 70s. And it becomes this movie shepherded by by Sean Penn when he becomes attached. And this is just kind of this incredible, this is like the murderer's row of the 70s and 80s acting, right? Where we have these, so many people that go on to have these incredible careers. Including, of course, Christopher Walken and Mary Stuart Masterson, among many, many, many that we'll be talking about. But why a crime family story to kick off the new year, Jim? What are we getting ourselves into here? Yeah,
I mean, we're slowly setting the base where we can even think about, you know, some of the grand crime families of cinema. So like The Godfather, right, is the ultimate. And so this is a little, you know, this is our little kind of like, you know, syndicate out in the country, you know, very small and compared to some of the grander visions. But like, you know, this is a film, you know, we're talking about family pictures. This is a film that really struck me when I watched it in the 80s, especially the relationship between Sean Penn, who is Brad in this, and his brother, his real life brother, Chris Penn, who's Tommy in this, and just their relationship really paralleled a relationship I had with my older brother, one of my two. So this is a real striking film for me in just my own personal family pictures kind of vision of what we're doing. And it's actually a film that's based on really amazing performances. And like you said, an unbelievable cast of characters that go on, pretty much all of them, to have their own very, you know, prominent career in Hollywood, which is unique. But we've seen this a couple of times now. We've seen The Outsiders, right? This is not unique in general to these early 80s films because this is a whole new generation of actors coming up. So I really like the film for that. I like it for all the actors. I like it for the family connection that I have with it. But also, I just think it's one of those really good, you know, not great, but good 80s films that are enjoyable to watch and think about and capture a story. So anyway, I'm so glad that you played along on this one because...
Yeah, this is the first picture that I had actually never seen before. And I know James Foley only from like Glenn Ross, the director of that film. And he's kind of a minor director in some ways who just basically stumbled into talent, right? In a lot of ways. Like Glenn Ross is, and you get a sense that he was probably a very good actor's director, you know, from what I read here and there. But let's start with those brothers, because to me, that's the seed of the film, right? It's like there's this opening scene where Tommy has screwed up a transaction that's true to my heart, where he's trying to get an adult to buy liquor for him. This is something I recall was a thing you would do in the 80s and literally did, and found a random gentleman to say, hey, will you buy me a half a case of beer? And you overpay him, you know, $15 for 12 beers that would cost $5 because you're buying Michelob Light. Or no, you're buying like Pabst Blue Ribbon and some piss beer out there.
Beer even.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and beer, like the Miller High Life plays a significant role in this talk, speaking of old school kind of crap beers. And so he gets ripped off, but probably deserved it because Tommy, as Christopher Penn, who's just lovely as just a prankster, just, a spirit that you can tell everybody loved probably having around on set, just like always cracking jokes, being funny, and just kind of, oh, it's Chris Penn. Gosh, he's wonderful. And who has since passed because, in general, I think he had like actual heart issues that were, he was born with. But anyway, Sean shows up to help save the day. But this is this beginning, like these two boys, and they're raised in an environment by their grandmother and mother where there isn't much happening. Whether they graduated high school, we don't know, but you get a sense they probably did not. They don't have jobs, and they're also just hanging out on the couch, getting stoned, watching cartoons and commercials together, and this is how we hang on to one another. In times of there's not much to do in these spaces, these towns, and you don't have prospects, and you just like latch on to the person that's next to you, and that means so much. And it sounds like there's something there for you.
No, totally. I mean, one of the things that come across in this film is obviously, like you said, it starts in this small square in this Pennsylvania town. And I don't know if you've seen Near Dark, but Near Dark is a kind of horror film that comes out the next year, 87. And it's almost an identical setting for how that film starts. It's amazing. And Jenny Wright, who's in Near Dark, looks exactly like Sean Penn. There's something that needs to be done with the 80s hair all framed up. It's just beautiful. But beyond that similarity, which is striking to me, we've asked people to buy us beer or, get us something that's illegal somehow. And I agree with you. Chris Penn is just one of those figures, coming off of Footloose and coming into like this film, like he's so lovable. And as a younger brother to someone who was like a Sean Penn-like figure, I totally identify with Chris Penn. And Chris Penn has such a great role in this film because he's kind of on the outside looking into his dad's love, right? His dad doesn't even know if it's his kid, right? There's kind of some, mythology out there that his wife, Sean Penn's mother and Chris Penn's mother, Tommy and Brad's mother, had this kid as Brad Sr. was going into prison. And so Chris Penn has this really interesting kind of role as brother to Sean, but also maybe bastard son. And like you said, the levity he brings to it, and that's just every time you see him, there's a certain amount of like joy, where Sean Penn is complete, like hardcore. We've talked about it before. He's all jacked up. He like looks like a Pennsylvania wrestler, and Pennsylvania was known for these very like badass wrestlers. Like Penn State was the place to go, and Long Island was somewhat of a wrestling kind of hub. But when I look at Sean Penn in this film, I see a wrestler, like just jacked up and ready to kick someone's ass. And, it's really these characters as a 80s teenager, because I'm not that much younger than Chris or Sean Penn, it really is identifiable. So for me, immediately the movie is I'm identifying with the characters, I'm identifying in the pecking order, and I'm seeing that brother relationship as like a real hook into this movie. So that's one of the reasons I definitely chose it. But yeah, I could tell stories about my brother, and I will, but I'll wait. I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole yet.
Yeah, and so they're living at home with their mother and their grandmother, and their grandmother, interestingly enough, is played by Eileen Ryan, who is actually Sean and Christopher Penn's actual mother, which is so the family business which is a big part of this story, exists in the real life as well as in this fictional life, which is a story about an actual crime family from the 70s. And they're definitely living a pretty hard scrabble rural Pennsylvania life. I mean, it's the classic working on the car in the kitchen kind of a family, right? With the cockroaches, and then the irons plugged in the ceiling somehow with the ironing board. And one of my favorite, this is the briefest notes, like the classic like can opener, bottle opener with the magnet on the fridge, these tiny little, production design details of this is what family life is here. But there's still like, there's this moment where they exist in this house, and it seems fairly like a happy house, right? There's this lovely moment, like at this particular scene, it's after Brad has kind of reunited with his dad, and he's come home, and we catch Tommy playing Monopoly with his mom and grandma, and Tommy is like counting out the spaces and saying, "Oh, my property, no problem. I don't own anything." And then his mom like basically ejects herself. Who's killing everybody? She's got like Boardwalk and Park Place, and she's got hotels in Connecticut, Vermont, and Oriental, and he's trying to convince Tommy's trying to convince his grandma like a negotiation. It's classic, like. I'm trying to manipulate you. And it's like, no, you can't. I'm your fucking grandmother. I know what you're about, Tommy. You can't screw me over. And it's just great. And even Brad's like little bed, and he has his like album covers up of like early REO Speedwagon, AC/DC live albums. And it's a real space, and it's really tight. Like you can see that Tommy's bed is like, kitty cornered right there. And it's this really tight, but in a tight family. It's a tight space, tight family making their means, even though nobody's got much of any jobs, but somehow they figure it out and they're doing okay. And so it does get disrupted, though, with the first appearance of Dad. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So you first see Christopher Walken walks in the door with this shock of hair, right? And his completely lit up eyes. And he's saying, hey, kind of pulling out $100 bills, asking if their mother needs it. And the greatest piece of this scene and how he plays it so quickly is he doesn't even know who's who with his sons. He doesn't know their names. He doesn't know who Tommy is. And it was actually, he was there with the figure Lucas, who's played by Crispin Glover brilliantly. And so he's rolling out these $100 bills, and Sean Penn's kind of, or Brad is kind of like, what's going on with this guy, and being somewhat cagey. And then he points over to Lucas and is like, Tommy? And Sean Penn's just like, no, Dad, you idiot. You don't even know your own kin, right? You talk so much about blood is all. And yet he comes into this room larger than life, but there's something wrong with this character. What's wrong with this character? He has absolutely no connection to his own blood, which is actually what he preaches for the rest of the film. So there's a real disconnect immediately as he walks into that scene. One of my favorite scenes, not only because he's, pulling that whole satanic figure with the money and tempting them into the life of crime, but also he has no idea who these kids are, and it's apparent. He was a terrible dad. They're like teenagers, if not early 20s by this point.
No, they're literally. I mean, in the real story, he's back in their lives, according, because they were actually the Johnson brothers, and Bruce Jr. was 20 when things fell apart. But they had only been in each other's lives again, according to the grandmother, for a couple of years. So basically 18 to 20, he reconnects, and that kind of tracks with this story of this brief moment of like, I'm going to go be a dad. And
that classic moment, right?
Yeah. And so part of being a dad, it's like, well, I have a lot to tell my son. And to me, these are the beginning of the rules and lessons of Brad Sr. for Brad Jr., right? Like there's a number of lessons that we have to learn. And the first one is actually, it's pretty practical. And from my perspective, I think a day later, Brad Sr. comes back. Brad comes back. Christopher Walken, he picks up Sean Penn, and the Brads are going down the highway, and it's some sort of GTO muscle type car, and it's not a highway. Actually, they're going down one of the back roads, and he's like, Dad, you're going pretty fast, and he's like, lesson number one. He doesn't say it this way, but it's like, only take the back roads, never touch the interstate. You never see a goddamn cop, right? And this is just a good practical piece of advice, which leads to another, I think within the same day, we're going to do some laundry today. Learn to do your laundry. And, the brothers have just boosted a safe from some, random warehouse. And he takes his son and they go buy a car, and it's a piece of shit car. And you're like, why is Brad Sr., who's like a connoisseur of some really nice 70s muscle cars, buying this piece of shit, K car? And for cash, for $5,000 with a sticker price of $5,500. Well, he gets in the car, immediately drives it across the street and sells it for $4,600 to another car dealership.
Of course, he didn't like the radio.
It didn't like the radio. No.
It didn't like the radio.
And so this is part of the early seduction, right? It's like, I have things to teach you, son, and I want you to be part of my life.
Get away with speeding on the side roads or the back roads, and how to launder money that you've stolen. Two pretty solid, lessons so far for Brad Jr.
Which leads us to basically, Brad is introduced to his extended family. So tell us, what is the home of Brad Sr., the home of Dad, like?
Home of Dad is great. So this is where we start to get into some of these kind of like a who's who of character actors in the 80s. The figure, one of my favorite actors of that era, and he comes up big, is David Strathairn. And he plays, what is his name?
His Tony Pine.
Tony Pine, the epileptic. So he always says Tony Pine, the epileptic, whenever he introduces him, which I love. So that's David Strathairn, who goes on, River Wild, Lincoln, you name it. He plays Morrow and Goodnight. And
Bourne series.
Yeah.
He's got a role.
I mean, he's just everywhere. So there's that. And then he also, let me go here.
Well, he's got his brothers. We got Tracy Water as Uncle Patch, and and we got Boyd, who's J.C. Quinn, and finally his who's playing his other brother, who's playing Dickie.
It's Artie.
Right. So that's the main cast of characters.
He's in a lot of stuff too. He's yet another character.
Yeah.
He's kind of a badass.
But it's Tracy Walter who ultimately steals the show as brother Patch, right? And because Tracy Walter is like an all-time great character actor in my mind, like from the 70s and 80s. I mean, my favorite character he ever played was the mechanic from Repo Man on the repo lot, and he was the philosopher, and he plays the same role basically in this film. Right? He's got ideas, and he needs to communicate them, and and this
that's what they're always saying to him.
Yeah. And but he's also he's the one who's left out, because you get and this is actually also in real life. I guess the youngest brother was the one who was not too bright, and it was kind of a tag along, obviously completely willing tag along. But yeah, I mean, Tracy Walter playing every single one of my favorite shows, like from WKRP in Cincinnati to just like guest shots and all these different types of wonderful things, and Taxi and you name it, he was in it at that time.
Character actor for the ages, right? He was in like over 170 films. Like, he's one of those epic character actors.
Yeah, and so, but these are the brothers, and this is what he's getting himself into, and he doesn't know Brad Jr. what it's going to be. He's invited to stay, right, immediately.
And we forgot one piece too.
Oh, what's that?
Brad Sr.'s new, I don't know if it's wife, girlfriend,
right,
who's just a few years older than Brad Jr., and
Right.
there's a tremendous amount of tension, whether it's sexual tension, whether it's jealousy, I don't know, between Brad Jr. and this character as soon as he walks in, right? As soon as he walks in, you can feel that tension. And Brad Sr. kind of loves it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He loves the tension. He loves this sense of chaos and like disruption, which is such a fascinating element of his character.
Yeah. And so, it is obviously, unsurprisingly, a stark contrast. We have the criminal family of brothers, right, who've been, terrorizing a better part of Pennsylvania's rural country near Philadelphia. And it's not a warm place to be, but Brad is buying into it. And he, this leads to soon the next lesson of Brad Sr. He invites Tommy. Tommy finally gets invited aboard. At first, he's kind of kept out of the loop. Tommy is a side character, and Tommy's asking his brother, "What's it like? What's our dad like?"
Yeah.
Because he does, and finally he's invited, and they go for a drive, and they're going through cow country, and Brad Sr.'s like, "It's the size of the lawn, the size of the stroke," and he's literally talking about the size of the width of the lawn marks of a mower, because if it's a big wide stroke, there's a good tractor there. And he says, basically, he's like, all these people, most people see farms, I see money. Anything that can move has my name on it. Brad Whitewood, hold for delivery. He's like, I'm ready to come rob anything. And he's like, he's teaching them how to scout. And, this is the beginning of their introduction to the actual business. And it comes to an abrupt, important meeting, which is the crux of, they have a lunch, and there's a number of family meals that are quite important here. Like the family meal, even though these are really gross family meals, the lobster dinner seemed pretty good.
Until Lester showed up.
Yeah, until Lester shows up. But they're at a classic diner having breakfast, and Pops pulls out his gun, puts it on the table. And he says, "You want this gun?" And Tommy's he's ready to shoot up the joint.
Give me something, right?
Yeah. And he's like, he's already talking about, well, I've given you some knowledge. And he's actually given Brad Jr. a car at this point, a really nice car, and because he had his shitty truck that he was constantly fixing. And that was another thing of this area. It's everybody's constantly fixing their vehicles, right? to get it started. The hood is always up. There's always something to be tightened or something to be jiggled to get it to start.
It's true. That carburetor. It's fun.
Yeah. And this is where the challenge is, the gauntlet is finally laid. It's you want a gun. It's you got to show me something between your legs, then I'll give you a present, right? And the present is access to the family jewels. And it's you got to show me something here. And this begins the Kitty Gang. And who's the Kitty Gang?
The Kitty Gang is the best. And I love it. So there's the brothers in the adult gang parallel with the Kitty Gang. And the Kitty Gang is another cast of characters. You got Kiefer Sutherland, a young Kiefer Sutherland who's just going to, after this, do Stand By Me when he plays Ace. And that's, a classic Kiefer Sutherland role. So this is a young Kiefer Sutherland. You got Tommy, right? We've already talked about that. You got Brad, Sean Penn and Tommy, Tommy being Chris Penn. You got Crispin Glover, played by Lucas, who is a complete early freak. Right?
Yeah. We have. Let's do the quick aside of the Crispin Glover, because I just couldn't help but Crispin Glover on women. All they want to do. He's crazy from the jump, and he holds this crazy character throughout. They want to talk to you nice, and he's really freaky. He's getting freaky with every. He's I'm going 1,000% every moment I have lines on camera.
Emo, he invented emo in this one.
Yeah,
this is emo. Thank you. And he goes on the next year to do River's Edge, which, he takes this character and basically, just rolls with it. but he's crazy they're at the swimming hole, and he's breaking a rock while everyone else is getting high. He opens the refrigerator door while Brad and Terry are together sleeping. And he's like, look,
he's lurking. Yeah.
God, he is amazing.
Yeah. It's one scene that like they're one of the important scenes where they're about to do their biggest job, and they're all talking about it. And Crispin Glover somehow has this ceramic Santa statue while everybody's just hanging out, and he's like stroking this ceramic Santa statue, and it's like. I mean, this is something I imagine as as directors working with actors and people that are really willing to go out there and make choices. Like he's clearly like always looking to make choices, and you can't imagine that this is not Crispin Glover just choosing and like I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be doing this. This is my character, and he's just completely unafraid of the moment. And obviously, even as like Marty McFly's dad, like it's just like a nutty character. Like it seems calm, but he's really out there with that swinging of the milkshake, and it's just he's a very raw performer that is unafraid of putting his spin, not unlike Christopher Walken, who obviously I think goes on to much more fame, but fearless performer.
Oh, fearless. And then the other character who we're forgetting is Aggie, who's played by Stephen Jeffries, who's probably most famous for his role as the kind of, kid/werewolf in Fright Night. You're so cool, Brewster. So that's who he is. And then I learned in a little bit of research that in the 90s, he kind of took his stepped away from Hollywood to do gay porn. And he was actually a gay porn actor for much of the 90s, and then came back into Hollywood in the 10s and 20s. And I was like, wow, what a strange, wild career. So I like him a lot. I think he's great.
So we've got the Kitty Gang, and you have a brief moment of the salad days of the Kitty Gang, right? They're like stealing tractors, exchanging them over to Brad Sr., and you think it's going to go well. But this is where finally Mary Student Masterson's character, I think, becomes very important. Like this is the very, very, very young girlfriend of Brad, Terry, and this is supposed to be presented as less pure romance, and it's interesting to research the actual story because she's killed so young. I mean, she was only 14 or 15 in the story with Johnson, and he's 20 at the time, so very underaged. And she gets caught up in this life of this. And I'll be honest, she's a character in real life that I find it would be very hard to do a lot of research on because she's so young and she died so young.
Yeah.
And it's somewhat kind of creepy to me and like not aging the best, like how romanticized this relationship is, right? Even in the news, like when you read about it, he wanted to marry her is always the context in which she's presented. And that can be 100% authentically true. And she becomes this character who becomes this force in Brad's life in the film. I mean, I'm putting aside the real life Johnson family and Robin Miller, who died. But Terry falls for Brad, and little Brad totally falls for Terry, and Brad tries to bring her in to the family.
Yeah.
And how does that go? Do you remember? This is at the bar.
This is a great scene. This is the scene when they're in some kind of, backwater restaurant bar. They get in, and Sean Penn's sitting, which is a lot of the scenes, the clips or the image you'll see of this movie is with Sean Penn and Terry on his lap. And he's talking with the gang. And Christopher Walken, the head of the gang, and then all of the characters we talked about, his brothers, etc. And basically, Sean Penn and Terry are communicating to the gang like they want in. And then she says, he's smarter than most of you. And then they start to get up from the table and leave. And
they literally walk off, all of them.
They're like, we want none of this.
Right.
Christopher Walken's pissed. And then like, this is the first kind of like, can I depend upon not only his son, but this woman who in some ways, or this girl in some ways, who's driving a wedge between his, kind of manipulation of his son and his son's own kind of predilection to maybe go off with her. So like, that's the first wedge, and she's at the heart of it. And in some ways she bears the brunt of this family in some way.
Right. And this is lesson number 5 from Brad Sr. Don't violate the group, right? Stick with me. This is the classic crime story rule. It finally comes up, right? It's like, this is a bond of blood, basically. Yeah. And you can't just willy-nilly bring anybody in, right? And classically in these kind of crime families, the men run it, the women are on the outskirts. And so don't you dare try to do this sort of thing again. And sadly, Brad Jr. is like, yeah, oh, sorry, Dad, basically, yeah. Right? And it's a big failure. But it does lead to, Brad Sr. is like, oh, you get it. I'm going to let you try out. Like he gets to move up to the big leagues with the big boys and do a tryout.
But it's also in some ways already the predetermined end of Terry, because I think at this point, the whole crew knows he says too much to Terry. He communicates too much with her. She's too much in on the information. She's not an outside. She's definitely an accessory. So like, right. There's that moment where you realize that her future, at least in this film, and as we know in the real story, is not going to end well. And right. In fact, it doesn't. But yeah, he does get a piece of the pie at this point. And his dad even says, "You really showed me something tonight."
Yeah. When he uses his walkie-talkie as a gun.
You really showed me something.
Right, which is yet another family dinner, probably my favorite family dinner, just because it's just absurd. They're having this lovely. They're at a fancy joint. They've just like had a big score. My son's done well. Now let's celebrate, and they have this big lobster dinner. Like, and you can imagine, like lobster dinner in the 80s. That was a thing, right? Like. That was like, man, that's a lot of money, right? Like I never had a lobster dinner as a kid, right? I mean, it was not a thing.
I know.
I did work at a lobster hut. It was one of the many jobs I had in my youth. And I can to this day tell you the size of a lobster just by looking at it, the weight of a lobster just by looking at it. It's a skill, Jim.
It is. Money in the bank.
But this is like, the failure of the family meeting with Terry leads to the next, the failure of the relationship. And now it's where this is the beginning of the end, because at this lobster dinner, they spot the local sheriff, having a meal of skirt steak, which they all crack up immensely.
It's like hamburger steak, and they all that joke.
Yeah. They're just like, oh, their gaudy, simple meal where we're having our like $20 lobsters. Oh, which it's coming up, but it's like this is a inflationary wise, this would be like $150 per person meal practically, right?
Yeah,
and so. This leads to, suddenly one of their former associates sits down with the sheriff and eyeballs, the Whitewood family as they're eating their lobster. And he makes the mistake of saying like, look, I'm talking to the cops. It's all cool. Like, cause he had earlier in the film tried to re-ingratiate himself, and Christopher Walken as Brad Sr. was like having none of it. It's like you're a loser, steer clear.
And which making a point to show his sons as well, because his son were at that breakfast table when he was basically given that no time at all. Right, and so this leads to his untimely demise, and Brad Jr. having to witness this. Yeah, and this happened in real life where I don't know if his son was witness to it in real life, where they drowned someone they were worried that was talking to the police. Yeah. And this becomes suddenly, this is a switch for Brad Jr. He's like, I want none of this. And he's actually, you get a sense because
immediately the next morning, he's fixing a car again and he's hanging out with Tommy. And Tommy, he's suddenly like, fuck, what have I brought Tommy into here? Right? And he's suddenly worried because he knows his brother is more sweet, a little more innocent. He's not aware of what's really going on. And he's concerned about him. And this leads to, this is one of my favorite random facts, is he's suddenly saying like, I could get a job fixing Fords, being a mechanic. And he mentions this number of, costs. He could make like 10, 12 bucks an hour. And so I was like doing some math. If he actually worked as a mechanic at that rate, that's like $440 a week, at about $23K a year, which in today's dollars would have been, $116,000 a year, or about 56 bucks an hour, which is really interesting. That is like also speaks to the the change in economics. Like in a different life, that man would have become a mechanic if he didn't have this crime family, if he had been a family of mechanics. If Brad Sr. had been like local garage guy with his brothers and they had all been mechanics and fixing cars all over town, he would have become a mechanic and it would have been a stable job, right? And you could easily
funny though about that is Tommy's like, that's not nothing. Like he's like, you'll be making nothing. And I was thinking to myself, like, 12 to 15 bucks an hour.
In the late 70s. No, this is 78. This is 78.
And they're in, basically in the country in Pennsylvania. So you have to think your dollar goes a little bit further.
Sure.
I was kind of surprised that wasn't a good option and you could kind of just jump ship,
But it was a good option. And that's the thing, is like that's the idea of like you can't escape the family business, I think, is one of the bigger themes of this film, is that they're drawn into crime because that's what dad does. And we're doing shit anyway. Right. And so much of this entire, like, space, it's the physical space where, the real crimes took place in this area of Pennsylvania called Chad's Forum, which also happened to be the home of one of the most famous American painting families, the Wyeths, where Andrew Wyeth, who is the son of N.C. Wyeth, who's this incredible illustrator of the early 20th century, and he becomes famous for his illustrations that are on the covers of magazines and in the 20s and 30s of classical things. And he goes on to paint one of my and he was homeschooled by his dad, so N.C. like keeps him at home. He's a frail kid, and so Andrew basically is raised as a painter in his father's studio, and he becomes one of the most famous American painters. And one of my favorite paintings of all time is Christina's World, of this woman at the base of this hill, this field looking up at the horizon. And it's a classic American farm country, rural country. That painting happens to be in Maine, but he spent most of his life in Chad's Forum Township. And there's so many layered family histories here across this film. We have the Sean Penn and his brother with his mother in the movie. We have the writer of the film, Kazan, Nicholas Kazan, whose father's Elia Kazan, who's one of the most famous directors in the history of American cinema as well. Like the father of method acting, directed Marlon Brando and James Dean, the two like godfathers of method acting in American movies. And yet, if you're born into a family of criminals, what else can you be but a criminal?
Yeah.
Not a mechanic.
And that's this whole idea of trying to escape your fate, which this film kind of tries to open up, right? The whole tagline of the film, which is one of my favorite taglines of all time, is like father, like son, like hell, right? Like the idea that you can actually break out of that cycle. So here's I'm going to actually add something new to our podcast, given it's a new year and we're just kind of pushing the boundaries of technology right now. I am going to actually give you a minute clip where, to set up the clip, it's actually with Sean Penn talking to Tommy, saying, Dad's a bad man. We're done with him. But then shows up in his beautiful convertible SS sports car, which is just beautiful. Walken makes an entrance. He's on fire. He looks almost a little like drugged up, right? And he asked Tommy to get him some wacky tobacco. Can you get me some of that for my meeting? But then as, Tommy goes into the car and he's apart, Sean Penn and Christopher Walken, or Brad Jr. and Brad Sr., have a little bit of a kind of moment where Brad Sr.'s like, you're coming out with us tonight. Sean Penn's like, I'm not coming. So this is the setup for this scene. Let's listen to it.
You want to live in a dump like this, working 10 hours a day in a cannery? I thought you were like me. I thought you wanted something. Car. Nice girl sitting in your lap. Money in your pocket.
You said I could go out on the side, right?
You scared?
I got something else.
Something or somebody?
Yeah. Terry and I are getting out of here.
Where are you gonna go? What are you gonna do when you get where you go?
I got some ideas.
How are you gonna pay? Apartment, food, clothes, all that.
I'll find something.
You find shit. All you know is how to steal. You're too fucking dumb to do that by yourself.
Oh, you think so?
I know so. You come back, crawling back to my daddy, daddy, give me something.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see.
Oh, the best line in the whole movie. You'll crawl back now to give you something. Oh my God. So that's a little bit of a sense of this interaction between Sean Penn, who's great, but Christopher Walken, who is phenomenal.
I mean, and he has to. I mean, I think it's as an actor, it's like Sean Penn generously letting him own him because he knows that's what his character's role is. Is like he's owned by his father, even though he's for the first times in the film pushing back a little bit, right?
Yeah, he's trying to be his own man. He's trying to say, "Look, I'm done with this. You're a bad man." And there's that whole theme that you're talking about, which I do think is the theme of the movie. Is like, what else will you know, kid? All you'll know is how to steal. And you're stupid on top of it. So you need me to teach you how to steal. And you need me to continue this lifestyle. And so there's this idea that there is no escaping from the family business. And I love the way you're talking about layering on the Penns, all of whom are in that, Hollywood family business, and the Wyeths or those artists, that this sense of not being able to escape a family's destiny or a family's lot, if you will, is a super interesting part of this film, I think, and the story more generally.
And they do, and they have literally. There's the dreaming of big sky country moment where Terry is professing to Brad, I actually have family out in Montana, right? And we could get out of here. He's like, I got a cousin who's so stupid, but he's got a job, I know you ain't so bright, my lover, but you get work. And that's, and after this, he to symbolize this, foretold, soon to be failed dream. He does a tattoo, like a prison style tattoo, with a circle with a little T in it. And this is his commitment to doing this, to escaping, we can do this. And, and the rest of the film is ultimately this kind of, we know it's coming, this failure of this dream, because this kind of, we've been taught that there's no way a family like this can escape. And, this is where the big plan happens. The Kitty Gang is going to do one big score, but it fails instantly. They end up in jail, and Crispin Glover's like, dude, cars! Yeah. Cars! Cars! They don't have the walkie-talkies or anything. He's just kind of moaning in the distance. There's
and Aggie feels the need to get a stand-up, picture of a woman,
a model by a tractor. The classic busty model next to a muscle car or a tractor. This is how you sell cars, and it's to this day, I think it's the same, right?
It's also at this point where this movie takes a dramatic turn, right? What we start seeing is not the Kitty Gang, but the adult gang, the Brad Sr. gang, makes some decisions about how they're going to deal with it. Because one of the things that's happening in the background is there's word that there's going to be a grand jury. and that the FBI is getting involved, and that there's serious heat on Brad Sr.'s gang. And so they're getting scared. And now that they know that the son, who has some real questions about what they've done, is being held in prison while all the others are being let go, they start to get scared. So what do, Michael?
They basically, do what happened in real life, which is they manipulate Terry, which leads to them luring her into a situation like they're going to take him to see Brad in prison. And in real life, this is something that happened where, as part of trying to control the situation, Bruce Johnson and Robin Miller would go often to the prison to visit Bruce Jr. And they obviously don't go into that detail because it's a film. And Brad Jr. is in jail, and Terry can't make it to the prison, so she reaches out and to Brad Sr. to say, like, hey, would you give me a ride there? But in the sequence, as in real life, he basically corners her, and she's raped by him. And this is it. And the killing of Lester was one thing, and you got a sense that Brad Jr. was going to hold the line of the family, keeping his lips shut with the family business. But Terry is this icon of purity in his mind. He is, the embodiment of his escape in his mind. And this is too much for him. And in real life, this actually, it's not exactly clear, but he definitely got her drunk, and it's all just really, really awful, especially remembering that she's only like 14 or 15 in real life. And in the film, she's 16.
Yeah.
And
pushed it up almost 17. She knows.
Yeah, I know. It's like, that's more acceptable in the 80s, right? It's like, fuck, And so because of this, Brad flips in jail. And then, with Brad Sr.'s network, with the cops, Brad Sr.'s the kiddie gang is doomed. And most importantly, in the beginning here, Tommy's doomed. Because, one by one, they're led to their pre-dug graves out in a field in Pennsylvania and just shot. Like, they think they're just going out like, oh, let's get another tractor or something. And then they just, murder them one by one.
It's really it's almost like Blood Simple, right?
Yeah.
You really get that sense of the noir in this last third or quarter of this film really comes on strong. Like, with the backing and the way in which they're on a hill, they put their graves for them. They're shot almost into the grave. Like, they were hoping Lucas would fall right into his grave.
Right.
It really gets to a point. And then, Krista Walken, or Brad Sr., tells a weird ass story to Tommy about coyotes and how coyotes, the female coyote has sex with all the male coyotes, and then there's a smell that she uses to lure all the dogs out into the desert, and then the coyotes circle them and then eat them alive. And I'm just like, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, I know. It's like I think Brad Sr. thinks he's like Genghis Khan or something, and he's like, creating the furious assault on like a massive land. And that I mean, I guess that makes sense if you really think about it. That's what he is. He is like this Genghis Khan like character with his entourage of family that has been surrounding this community and committing violence and theft for almost a decade at this point. With without much he's gone to jail a couple of times, but it's nothing major, and he's gotten away with all of it. And so he expects, by the sheer force of his personality and his imposition on this community, that he will be successful again if he just gets rid of a few people. And there is this final pairing of the two families, because we the grandmother and mother have been diminished quite a bit, and their impact on the two brothers for quite some time now, but they kind of reappear in this brief moment of like hope, like the dream is still alive. They allow us to imagine Big Sky Country Dream as a possibility. And you get this, scene where Terry and Mom and Grandma and Brad are like making plans, and Grandma's giving money to them so that they can escape and leave. And what's really interesting is the mother gives a photo of Tommy Brad and their grandmother, which is literally a family photo, right? That's Mother Penn with her 2 sons, right?
Yeah.
And but it's so awful because it quickly turns, because at the same time we have the final meeting of the brothers, right, where they're deciding the fates of Brad Jr. and ultimately Terry as well, because like, if she's around, what do we do? It's like, of course we're gonna kill her. And but Patch being Patch for a moment, he can't help himself. It's like he's like, let's just tie him up and just stare at him for a while.
Naked and stare at him.
And give him a lollipop.
Exactly.
make him trade. This is like I wonder if this is like an intentional insult. Like, make him have Budweiser, because they've been drinking like Miller High Life and Rolling Rock the entire film, and it's like, well, make him have a Budweiser.
I remember when Brad Jr. orders a Rolling Rock, and they're like, whoa,
yeah,
like, high now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you got money. Rolling, and that was a thing too. I remember that. It's like a high school kid, like the green bottles with the painted labels, stenciled labels. That was like
rock into Long Island. I mean, that was a thing.
Yeah, it was like good. Wow,
yeah.
Rolling Rocks, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that was the contrast. Like that was, and as an arc, as a moment of time, that was a wonderful piece of like, setting. Like Miller High Life was, poor man's beer. Rolling Rock was a rich man's beer, right?
Totally.
And these were these subtle little things that, someone from today would never notice that, but that was something that we literally experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
And, but, this is setting up for what really happens is, poor Brad and Terry are ambushed by Terry's house, which has this really odd, really brief liminal moment. You're like, holy fuck, Terry comes from family, from money. Her family does.
Yeah,
like
she's loaded.
Yeah, like the house is grand, and like she leaves a note on an end table next to a giant banistered stairwell.
And you never see her parents. Her mom calls out to her one scene, twice, and 2 scenes, but you never see them.
No, and this is the only moment. This is a moment of registry where you're like, her life is very different, right, than theirs, and we didn't know this. Like, because when they meet like where, as you're describing, Terry's mother's calling out for her. They're just in a farm field, so we have no idea. Like, their family life could be anything.
Exactly.
Right, and so you're ultimately, you get a sense of like you're misled, even though like she's being close held by her mother. Terry is, like, she describes how I couldn't meet you early in the film because my mom wouldn't let me out. I got grounded, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, as they're trying to prepare, they're gunned down. And in real life, they actually, she dies. Robin Miller died and Terry dies. And miraculously, Brad, and the same thing with Bruce Johnson Jr. lived after both of them getting shot in the film and in real life about 8 times.
Yeah, it's one of those like really classic, like, mob job shootings in a car.
Yeah,
right? Like you come up and you're not expecting it.
Yeah,
they get in the car and they're ready to drive away. He just got he was messing with his carburetor again, just got it working, and then gets in, and then they come from both sides, right? It's a hit. Like that, there's no other way to describe it. It's a full-blown hit.
And this is where the movie, directorially kind of takes an interesting turn.
Yeah.
Because somehow, like, Brad Jr. turns into Rambo from Rambo 2, right? It's like, and even though it's this synth movie soundtrack this entire time, and you're just like, this synth soundtrack, I'm hearing bum bum, and it's like Brad Jr., instead of putting on his red bandana, bum bum, and the glistening muscles and the strapping on of like, strips of ammo and
his M60 machine,
right. Instead, he's similarly like washing his body of the blood of these 8 bullet wounds, and somehow is just simply wrapping them up and cleaning up for this final confrontation. So it's really odd, but there's the final confrontation. We need the final denouement between the Brad Jr. and Brad Sr. And I don't know if there's much really there. It's the often quoted, like, is this the family gun kind of moment? But this is the most Hollywood aspect of the film, if you will. And I personally, and I think people sell it like, this is, Sean Penn's moment, and Christopher Walken's still great. And he's kind of shooting at him left and right, not killing him. But at the same time, I personally didn't connect with that so much as like this kind of slow burn descent into, the family business and what it ultimately would lead to.
Yeah. And there's a problem with that last scene. And like, he keeps on shooting around him, and, Christopher Walken's all freaked out. But supposedly one of his arms is bleeding and he can't use it. And he's got the gun in the other, and he's looking at the phone. And if he only has a gun in one hand and his other arm is useless, how the hell is he going to call 911?
I know, but then we hear we hear the music of the cops in the background, and
but how did they know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I mean, not to focus too much on it, because I ultimately think that the success of this family picture is dependent so much upon that relationship between, Brad Jr. and Brad Sr., Christopher Walken being this electric force of a charismatic but menacing dad, right? And that's the ultimate thing that we have to reconcile with as viewers, is that he knows he's bad. Like from the beginning, Brad Jr. is like, I hear you're into stealing. And he's like, I ain't into stealing. That's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, right. But the title's good,
Registration's fine. It's clean.
Right. And that is the inescapable draw of wanting to be parented, right? Wanting to be part of something. He has a lovely kind of home, even though there's no real direction, but you figure it was a supportive environment with his mother and his grandmother, and he had a wonderful brother in Tommy who would do anything for him. Yeah. They would have figured something out, and they would have been okay. But he's just so beautiful and interesting, and I need to go the direction of my father. And that's the they try to sell it as this story of redemption. Well, he gets him in jail, but I don't buy it. To me personally, I think that's too Hollywood. In real life, Bruce Johnson Jr., he's in jail again now.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what I was going to say. The whole idea of redemption and escape. In fact, if we look at the real life story, is not the case. He got back into dealing drugs, and he's in a spell right now. I think in 2013 he got and he's now back. And that was, for me, it was interesting because it's can you really escape your family destiny? Right. And I think as part of a Family Pictures podcast and our own struggles, right, both with our children growing up, but us and our relationship with our parents, this is something that we all struggle with, is that relationship and doing everything we can to avoid it, but then still finding at that crucial moment, oh my God, I'm just like my dad, or oh my God, I'm just like my mom. That moment is interesting to me. And I think this film obviously can't really deal with that. But the performances, between Sean Penn and Walken and Chris Penn and the whole idea of families are just so good. It really makes it for, a great film of performance. And the bigger questions I think this film can't really answer. And that's probably, like you said, a direction problem, not really an acting or a talent problem.
Right. And so, it's the 80s, and they have to try to give Brad Jr.'s character, Sean Penn, some justice, but it's not there, right? And I think you're so right. And just there's moments in your life as you get older and you hear your voice and you're recognizing the cadences of your parents, or in my case, my mother, and you're holy cow, that's terrifying, right? And so these, the bonds of blood which so much of this is about, are something that you must deal with in ever so small a way as just an average human being that doesn't decide to steal tractors and deal drugs and but it's just gets a bunch of guys together and builds a business because that's what you do, and then you have enough people and you can do it, which is what Jim Groom is kind of famous for, I think, in his life. And I actually really appreciate that about you.
I have to say this, though. So I don't know how much time we have left to stay under the hour mark. How much time do we have left?
We're fine. We're a little over. It's fine. Just go for it.
So look, talking about kiddie gangs, right? So when I was growing up on Long Island, I don't know if I've ever said this before on this show. So we built a half pipe in my backyard because my brother and I were skaters, and I was younger, right? And so there was this big condo going up behind the church. There was a church, St. Chris, and behind it was a school, but they ripped down the school and they were building condos. And so my brother had this idea of like, oh my God, I can't afford the wood for this half pipe, but there's so much wood over in that condo space. So this guy cuts a hole in the fence, right? But then doesn't take anything yet, sends us a bunch of like 12-year-olds with skateboards and says, take as many 4x8s, plywood as you can, put them on the skateboard and walk past the police station because we lived right near the police station.
So you're
like 15 kids with 4x8s on skateboards walking past the police station. My brother is sitting in the backyard waiting for it to come to help build this ramp. We did that for like 3 days.
Wow.
The wood for the ramp. So I kind of do come from a little bit of a Bruce Johnson senior, junior family, and not being understand fully what I was into. I can claim I was young enough not to really know.
Well, you were literally young enough to not know.
I was, but my brother was a mastermind. He knew what he was doing. He went in there late at night, cut all those metal wires that held the 4x8s together. So they were all free. So he's like, go in there. It's right near the fence. Take them out. I cut it big enough, put them on the skateboards and go.
So how many pieces of house sheathing did you steal?
Jesus, enough to build a 4x12, 8-foot high ramp.
It's got to be at least like 5, 6, 7, 8 of them.
We stole a lot of them.
Well, that's a family picture to end a podcast on. So Jim Groom, thank you so much.
Always.
And we'll see you guys next time with another story of degeneracy in the Groom family or more or something else. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.